Hello, welcome to another panel of SETA Foundation. We have really distinguished guests, very experienced in both practice and theory. And today we will discuss a very important, but currently, unfortunately, ignored topic. It's Libya. Well, the whole globe has focused on Ukraine and Russia crisis, and mostly discussing what will happen, how it proceeds, or what could be the outcomes of this war. And that's correct, because it's the imminent threat or risk for the security of the overall globe, because we were talking about the Third World War, if it's possible or not, or it's a probability or not. But we forgot Libya, because there is a lot of things going on over there. So in this panel, we will focus on what's going on, what happened, what's going on, and what will happen, what could happen. In this panel, I'm accompanied by three distinguished guests. The first one is Bilgehan Öztürk from SETA Foundation, and I would like to first introduce him. Well, he's a researcher in Foreign Policy Department of SETA Foundation. His main research interests are civil war, non-state armed actors, Turkish foreign and security policies towards MENA region, and with a special focus on Libya and Syria. And he co-authored a book, Countering Violent Extremism in Libya, a peace-building perspective, which was published by SESRIC of the Organization of Islamic Conference. The second speaker, panelist, is really an experienced practitioner in the field. If I mispronounce it, please forgive me. Miss Raphaëlle Guillon, a member of Dialogue Advisory Group. If I pronounce it wrongly, please forgive me. Raphaëlle has worked with a variety of international organizations and NGOs, both in the field and also in the headquarters. And his focus was the Middle East and North Africa region in general. Also, she engaged with the missions in the field, like the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, UNSMIL, UN Department of Peace Operations, and has extensive experience in Libya, Afghanistan, and Nepal, and also contributed to the mediation efforts in Libya and Western Sahara. That means she covers a great geography in terms of her experience. She graduated from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London and from the Institut d'études politiques in, I can't pronounce the rest, please, you do it. Sorry for that. And finally, we have Samual Ramani from Royal United Services Institute. Most of us know his face from the TV screens. He's a tutor of politics and international relations at the University of Oxford, where he received his PhD in March 2021. And he's also a geopolitical analyst and commentator who contributes regularly to media outlets. And his interest is to develop a new theoretical framework to explain the linkages of Russian domestic politics and Moscow's counter-revolutionary military and diplomatic interventions in Ukraine, Syria, and the broader Middle East. And his first book is on Russia's foreign policy towards Africa. And I think it will be published, please correct me if I'm wrong, by Oxford University Press and Hearst and Company in 2022, it says. I don't know if it has already been published or not, by the way.
Yes,
thank you so much.
June 30th.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. So we are looking forward to read it. So Libya means a lot for me. For the last 4 or 5 years, we have read a lot. We have visited as SETA Foundation Libya and met many Libyans, clearly trying to understand exactly what they think. And there was a clear challenge in 2019 on April 4th. Well, it was an attack to Tripoli by Haftar's forces. On the other hand, a lot happened. I mean, we experienced a political process via Berlin Conference. Later then, the conflict erupted more intensely than ever, and Haftar withdrew back to the Sirt-Jufra line. And currently, the status quo that the UNSMIL facilitated, is in charge, even though there are some challenges. That means we are in a phase of political transition, even though we have deficiencies because of the internal and external challenges, other than the events that is not that much relevant to Libya, but could be, like Ukraine and Russia, conflict. So that means we have achievements and we have failures. So in this sense, first I would like to have Bilgehan, just to give us a broad picture on, what's going on in Libya right now, and what dynamics are valid, and what about the probable internal escalation just after Bash Aga's, attempt to have a parallel government to the Tripoli GNU. So what's your perspective? Can you just summarize it?
Thank you, Dr. Aslan. It's a real pleasure to share this panel with such distinguished speakers, fellow speakers. And thank you for organizing this, first of all, because it is not easy to discuss Libya at the moment while everyone is looking at somewhere else. But I will try to shed some light on why we are where we are in Libya at three levels. And that is namely the individual level, the national level, and if I have time, if time permits, I will try to analyze the regional and international level of why we ended up in this conundrum. And starting with individual level, I believe individuals matter in this conundrum. Basically, the current situation, the current confrontation started with what Aguila Saleh and Bashara did through designating Fatih Bashara as the prime minister via a House of Representatives vote, which is mired by a lot of complications. But I will not go into those legal discussions, because the legal complexities are abundant enough to fill the whole panel discussion. So I will stick to this political side of the matter. And as I said, the individuals matter, and basically this is something that was kicked off by a coalition building between Aguila Saleh and former Interior Minister Fatih Bashara. And in this sense, it is really important to dig into this coalition. Why, in the first place, these two supposedly conflicting figures came together as against the current Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibeh. And in this respect, I have to really emphasize the Dbeibeh factor in Libya since his assumption of Prime Minister office. And Prime Minister Dbeibeh proved to be a bit of a wild card based on his performance as a Prime Minister. And if we compare his performance as a Prime Minister with his predecessors, he performed really well in terms of his popularity and in terms of instrumentalizing the government spending in increasing its popularity. And I will come back to this point in the later stages of this presentation, but that must be emphasized. And Prime Minister Dbeibeh's success and surprisingly good performance in PM's office became a threat perception for both Aguila Saleh, Fatih Bashara, and other wannabe potential candidates in the future of Libyan politics. And there was only one opinion polls in the run-up to the elections date in December 24th last year, and it was indicating that Prime Minister Dbeibeh was faring by far better than any other candidate in almost all regions of Libya. And we have to also be aware of the fact that there is a consistency in the conduct of especially Aguila Saleh. We have to remind ourselves that this is a move by chiefly by Aguila Saleh and against Prime Minister Dibeibe, and this is not the first time. And if we remember that Prime Minister Dibeibe and the Government of National Unity proposed a budget, but the budget was not endorsed in the House of Representatives, and Aguila Saleh was quite influential in this. And the excuse or the pretext in not endorsing this budget was the development budget was quite lavish, so we can't endorse this budget. But the real reason was Prime Minister Dibeibe was already gaining a considerable level of popularity, and if this lavish budget is endorsed, he will have a free hand to make even greater government spendings, which would inevitably increase his popularity further. So this was a threat perception by many Libyan political actors. So Aguila Saleh firstly prevented this, and then towards the run up to the election date in December, he even almost unilaterally withdrew the confidence from the Government of National Unity that was granted by the House of Representatives back when Government of National Unity was sworn in. So if we take into consideration the previous steps, actually this latest attempt is complementing the previous attempts to get rid of Dibeibe. So and we have to also remind ourselves that there was actually a weak spot. The weak spot was the weak spot was the fact that the elections did not take place in December 24th last year, and although it was not exclusively Prime Minister Dibeibe's fault not to have elections at that time, Aguila Saleh and also Prime Minister designate Fethi Bashagha instrumentalized this let's say the weak spot very well, and they now with this move in fact exploited this weak spot. Yes, the elections did not take place, and they now have an arguably strong, let's say, motivation or argument to dislodge the existing Government of National Unity, giving the reason that elections did not take place. And this is the individual level. I'll try to wrap up, and I will go to the national level. When it comes to national level reasons why we are facing these developments at the moment is it is beyond actually figures, beyond individuals. It is beyond who comes and goes into power. There are deep-rooted, structural, long-term problems in Libya, and division is actually the one of them. Division, when we talk about division, actually we are talking about not only a geographical division, we are talking about the institutional division in the country. Roughly a division, geographical division between the east and west, and it trickles down into daily practices such as even the Prime Minister Dibeibe could not visit Benghazi, for example, as a Prime Minister. He was prevented to visit Rabat, a southwestern city. These are quite exemplary of how divided the country is. And likewise, Aguila Saleh, for example, or Haftar can't visit Tripoli either. So the division, geographically speaking, division is very deep-rooted, and it is one of the constants in Libyan national sphere that tend to create this kind of confrontations and symptoms anytime. So what we are facing now as like two prime ministers, one prime minister is trying to the PM designate actually trying to undermine the authority or get rid of the existing prime minister. It is just a symptom of this ongoing constant problems. And the division is not just a geographical one, as I said. Even the crucial sectors like security sector, military, the oil sector, and maybe most of above all the economy and central bank. Even central banks are divided. and there is a very limited level of let's say communication and cooperation in running day-to-day economics of the country. And the division is really influential in creating this kind of problems, that each party actually in this division lacks something, and they want to, in a sense, finish off the incomplete job. They want to complete what is left, let's say, incomplete. So in the east you have oil crescents, and in the west in Tripoli you have the capital, you have resources, you have central bank coffers, and everyone is actually dependent on, or sometimes is held hostage to one another. So each party has the motivation to get rid of this weakness and try to be self-sufficient in a way. And I have to say that behind this coalition making between Aghila Saleh and Fatih Bashagha against Abdulhamid Dibeibe, I think it would be wrong to not mention the reason that there is this conflict about the payment of salaries of so-called Libyan National Army, and I believe this is one of the main reasons what, let's say, instigated this move by these actors. And I will come to the other ongoing structural problem, which gives a lot of problems and symptoms. This is a very well known crisis of legitimacy. Yes, I'm not saying that every single actor in Libyan political sphere enjoys the same level of legitimacy, but at the end of the day, the legitimacy of each actor is flawed. As there hasn't been national elections, and none of the actors' legitimacy is full-fledged. So this lack of legitimacy, or the flawed legitimacy enjoyed by certain actors, actually creating a space to be exploited, as we recently saw with this move by Bashagha and Saleh. And in the other thing that is really closely tied to the legitimacy issue is the authority problem. There is no overarching state authority in Libya. Just imagine if there was a state authority, unquestioned state authority, like as in Egypt or as in Tunisia, it would be just a popular revolt against this authority. It would be a coup d'etat, maybe, in order to get rid of the ongoing existing authority, but not this kind of the coalition building and trying to dismantle the existing authority. And I think we are close to our time limits. I think I have to leave the regional and international level analysis of this maybe to the second round, but I have to also mention the latest element of the ongoing structural problem that is the external intervention. This external intervention dimension is operates in a kind of vicious circle, and both domestic actors are resorting to external patrons in order to get the upper hand in their domestic struggles with their rivals, and external actors are also exploiting this. So in a vicious circle, these ongoing long-term structural problems are creating an environment to be exploited by domestic actors in this fashion. Thank you very much for this.
I thank you. I thank you. If you go through the overall speech of you, I think the main issue for me is the division, because it clearly identifies the probability of the escalation in Libya. Now we see that, now we have a solid East. Well, by the way, I don't agree with this argument that Libya is composed of East, West, and South. There are many dynamics that makes really a lot of exceptions in country. I mean, you can't talk about a solid East or solid West or solid South. So it's intertwined and also a mixture of a complexity. On the other hand, that's clear. The main forces on the ground, for the Western forces now, it has been divided. Mainly Misrata is the dominant city in the west other than Tripoli, and think that both Dibeiba and Bashar are from Misrata, and this division is somehow a type of clear advantage for Haftar's forces. On the other hand, now it reminds me, if there happens any escalation, if this division is concerned, and I think it will be the second round question for you, if you expect an escalation or not, especially if this division somehow takes the Western armed groups face to face each other, challenging each other. Okay, now I would like to pass to Raphaëlle, Guillon, because this status quo in Libya was somehow, you know, an output of UN's mill, and you were there. Think that it was the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum that created the current transition period, designing an election process, a new system of presidential council. That means they were made up of 9 members, even though in de facto they were less. And now we have 3 members, a government. And, you know, now Bashar actually challenges not the government of national unity, but the system that was really shaped by the UN's mill. Well, I would like to ask, what is the attitude of international community, mainly the UN's mill? Because it appears that Stephanie Turko-Williams seems a bit impartial. I mean, just in between. I mean, she's just to observe the current government because this is her output. On the other hand, maybe just imagining the projections if Bashar achieves. That means they're in between. So what do you think about it? What is the attitude of international community and mainly the UN's mill?
Thank you, Murat, and thank you to SETA for providing me with this opportunity. I mean, just, and I think Bilgehan's last point is a perfect segue into my own presentation. I mean, first, to respond to your first questions about UNSMIL's attitude, I think UNSMIL's mandate is very clear, and it is to support a Libyan-led, Libyan-owned process. So that explains UNSMIL's position as an impartial mediator, which is exactly what the UN's role is supposed to be. Continuing on this, we see that political confusion continues to prevail somehow in Libya. I mean, with split governments and competitions between Fatih Bashara and the incumbent Prime Minister Dibeiba at the moment. And we have seen in that context a flurry of diplomatic activity seeking to prevent further fragmentation and formalization of the partition of the country that would, in essence, equal to one side falling squarely under Russia's influence. And I think in that regard, I think it's important to read current realignments with Ukraine as a backdrop. I mean, it may be perhaps too early to assess the full scope of the implications that Russia's invasion of Ukraine may have on Libya, but somehow we are already witnessing a degree of international realignment, and that's not surprising. I mean, given Libya's strategic importance for regional actors, therefore ripple effects were to be somehow expected. After the HRR vote endorsing Bashar's government, I mean, what we have seen mostly was a prevailing ambivalence within international quarters. The UN voiced reservations on the vote of confidence, and no country except Russia officially recognized the new government. If you recall, I mean, France, Germany, Italy, the UK, the US issued a joint statement that took note of the UN's position and called for stability. Later on, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, which I think is an interesting alliance, in a joint statement affirmed the support for the Libyan process, and directly also support to the HOR and the HSC, but backing the HOR, which is Cairo's main partner. but refraining from supporting officially Bashar's government itself. As I said, I mean, it may be a bit too early to assess what Ukraine is going to mean for Libya, but it seems lately, I mean, and by lately I mean in the last couple of weeks, that the proximity of Libyan actors with Russia is starting to become almost a defining factor, with competing parties, Libyan parties, seeking to secure international support through publicly distancing themselves from either Russia's intervention or Russia's presence in the country. I mean, Prime Minister Dbeibah was one of the first to unambiguously positioning the GNU as strongly anti-Russia. On the other hand, we've seen how Fatih Bashar has also been trying to distance himself from Moscow, despite Russia's initial endorsement, and reiterated, like, I think in the last couple of days, his desire to see Russian troops depart from Libya, but also sending messages of support to UN resolutions in favor of Ukraine. I mean, those changing dynamics in terms of, have led somehow to a revival of US engagement on the file, at least at the local level. And that's something we've seen in other countries in the region. We have seen a renewed US engagement, regionally speaking, as a way to reassert US position as a regional player, but equally to boost attempt at finding the solution to the current political crisis. I mean, we've been witnessing a more proactive US role with Special Envoy Richard Norland, leading efforts to build an international consensus in close cooperation with Ankara, but also Cairo, and possibly seeking to insulate Libya and the broader North Africa region from further Russian influence and disruption. I mean, in a couple of days, I mean, the US are convening a P3+2 meeting in Tunis, but with the additional two members, Ankara and Cairo, almost in an attempt to recreate a form of international coalition to solve the Libyan crisis while isolating Russia. In the current context of flaring oil and gas crisis, it's also not surprising to see active US engagement and in renewing discussions around the economic track, again in an effort to prevent a disruption of oil and gas production from Libya, which would be quite an issue at the moment. Cairo's position is also of relevance. I mean, we've seen, Cairo's red line continued to be an unwavering support to Aguila Saleh, but at the same time, distancing itself from Haftar, again referring to the statement that was issued earlier. And it's not surprising that in that context that Cairo is attempting to hold a joint meeting between the SOR and the HSC joint committee early in April, again in an effort to preserve institutions that are, I mean, at least one institution, the Eastern Parliament, that is clearly an ally, but however, that has consistently worked for self-preservation rather than the interest of the Libyan population. And that unwavering loyalty by Cairo to the HOR might be an obstacle to UN-led efforts at breaking the deadlock and advancing on the constitutional track. However, given that the current diplomatic triangle between the US, Ankara, and Cairo, that support does not appear to be negotiable. I mean, I see that time is running, but and I mean, we can engage on Turkey's role, but again, Turkey is obviously a very key element of that new coalition, a bit like Ukraine. I mean, playing an instrumental role in mediating between both Libyan parties, with which Turkey has maintained a close relationship. I mean, and a bit of analysis now. I mean, I'm wondering whether in the current context, Haftar is not the one having the most to lose, as he appears too beholden to Russia, both financially and security-wise in terms of military support. I mean, the current international realignment might be more comfortable with Bashar as a unifying figure, especially if, as I think it's happening, he's encouraged to distance himself from Haftar, possibly through the appointment of a new executive that would appear as less beholden to Haftar. I mean, that option would somehow result in killing two birds with one stone. I mean, removing from the equation someone that has facilitated Moscow's encroachment in Libya, has proved himself an unreliable partner, and continues to act as a toxic factor for any kind of Libyan political settlement. I mean, more broadly, and you mentioned, Murat, the impact on the UN. I mean, I think we can continue to see a degree of obstructionism by Russia at the Security Council. I mean, UNSMIL's renewal is coming in a couple of weeks. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. We know that Russia has objected repeatedly to the nomination. I mean, to nomination of possible candidates as UNSMIL SRSG, and has regularly criticized the current special advisor. I mean, we can anticipate Russia to continue in that regard. Yeah. However, this is like a failing tactics, because the result ultimately in the current circumstances is further antagonism vis-a-vis other countries that are indeed supporting UNSMIL's current leadership. And here I will conclude briefly with one word of caution. I mean, I would warn against a tendency to look at Libya only through an international angle, as if Libyans didn't have their own agencies. And as Bilgehan mentioned, I mean, Libyans have been very apt. I mean, Libyan political and security actors have been extremely apt at manipulating foreign interference and foreign actors and benefiting from foreign fragmentation in order to push for their interest. And I mean, one should not overlook that Bashar's image has been tainted by his alliances with General Haftar, and that may be a significant obstacle in his attempt to replace the Beiba as a new executive. However, and again, I mean, the situation remains fluid, but I mean, what the current situation has only encouraged is further distrust by the broader Libyan population vis-a-vis its political and security elite, given their inability to deliver on elections, which is something that the Libyan population does expect at the soonest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Raphaëlle. You know, I would like to just delineate something as a complementary remark regarding the attitude of international community. I think it's heavily intertwined with the attitudes of the local actors, because we know that there is a type of tradition or a type of tendency in Libya that they are searching for external support just to continue their agenda inside the country. And in this sense, I see it significant, because I think that the presidential elections were a clear turning point, but couldn't be achieved. On the other hand, some candidates were in a phase to search support from the other countries, rather than just going and knocking the doors of the public. So it's a strange situation. I mean, it's the people who will vote for you, not the external states, just right after a desired political system. And I think it has become a type of leverage for the external actors to impose something. But in the second round, I would like to have your opinion mainly about the attitude or the policies of the state, France, because you know, France has become one of the dominant actors shaping this issue, and the attitude of French politics is really important in estimating the future of this crisis. So I would like to go to Samual Ramani, Dr. Ramani, because now we have a great input in international arena. As you may know, all basic, you know, international relations books clearly identifies the unit of analysis. And it's the structure sometimes that impose something. And today we are discussing the conflict in Ukraine, Russian aggression, and in the meantime, its probable impacts in the other conflict-laden areas like Syria, like Libya. And you know that Russia is in Africa, mainly in Mali, challenging clearly France, for instance, or the United States. This is my argument. Maybe you agree or not. We can discuss it later. But Russia seems like implementing a new containment policy to NATO just because of this Libya to Mali direction. Reminds me the NATO's policy to contain Russia. So it may be a type of topic, but I would like to have your opinion. Well, we have Russia in Libya. They are in conflict in Ukraine. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. On the other hand, Russia is more independent in Libya. I mean, Haftar is just an instrument, and now they can easily find somebody else, like Saiful Islam Gaddafi or else. But what do you think about Russian perspective for Libya and your future projection on it?
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much, Murat, for your comments and for this great session so far. It's been fascinating. With respect to Russia's policy towards Libya, I mean, I think that we're obviously at a critical inflection point because Russia is moving away from a strategy that's been largely focused on consolidating its influence in the eastern part of the country with the Tobruk-based government of Aguila Saleh and Khalifa Haftar, and towards trying to pursue a strategy that will allow it to balance between both West and East, and also give it vital revenues in terms of oil, in terms of prospective arms sales, that will help ameliorate the impact of Western sanctions. And this is part of a broader strategic recalibration that Russia is doing on the African continent. Africa so far has aligned with much of the rest of the global south, like South Asia, like Southeast Asia, much of the Middle East and Latin America, by not condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Only one country in Africa has voted in support of Russia consistently, that's Eritrea. Many of the others are in that gray zone of abstaining, and that includes Libya. So the Libyan position has kind of been sort of on the fence over here. Russia appears to be viewing Africa as an increasingly important market as part of its non-Western pivot, or for the pivot towards a post-Western future, as former President Dmitry Medvedev has described. It's notable that in the first, in the day before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we saw Mohammed Hameti Dagalo, the Rapid Support Forces chief from the Sudanese military, visit Moscow and then pursue continued economic deals as well as the potential naval base. We've seen Vladimir Putin engage extensively with African leaders, from South Africa on mediation with Ukraine to other countries, even where Russia did not have that much of an established footprint, like Senegal, over the past month. So it's clear that Russia is paying an increasingly important attention towards Africa. And within that, Libya is going to play an important role within Russia's African strategy. Moreover, there's the long-term budgetary squeeze that Russia is going to have to face with regards to the fact that it's not only suffering from the impact of Western sanctions, but it's also chosen to combine guns and butter effectively and increase the pensions and benefits for ordinary Russians. So that might mean that in a post-war environment, after this operation is over, the formal military budget of Russia gets squeezed, and informal security institutions gain more influence and more clout because they also have access to mines and other extractives that could provide revenue for the Russian state. So that gives a new renewed impetus for the Wagner Group to play an increasingly important role. That's just an overarching, in Libya and elsewhere, overarching view of how the crisis in Ukraine has impacted Russia's policy towards Africa, what that might mean for Libya, and what that also might mean for the Wagner Group. But we're still in that strategic recalibration away from an Eastern-centric policy towards nationwide policy. So let me just provide a bit of an overview of some of the things that Russia is trying to achieve in Libya and place it into a bit of a recent historical context for all of us over here. So from 2011 to 2016, the Russians really found themselves somewhat in the lurch after the overthrow of Muammar al-Gaddafi. They really did not have close relations with the National Transitional Council, which vowed to place the countries that worked with and supported the overthrow of Gaddafi to the front of the line. So Russia, much like China, somehow got squeezed out during that period. Russia, however, viewed Libya as an increasingly important theater for its Middle Eastern power projection, for its ability to showcase itself as a diplomatic arbiter in the region, and also for the expansive material and geostrategic benefits that it could bring. So access to oil and also potential access to arms. There's a fondness within the Russian establishment, especially from diplomats who served during the Soviet era, for Libya's creditworthiness during the Gaddafi era, unlike other Middle Eastern countries where they had to haggle and wrangle for contracts and face cancellations and non-payments. Libya was always fairly consistent because of its oil wealth, and they wanted to reestablish that relationship. Moreover, Libya's strategic location in the Mediterranean as a gateway to expanded influence there to complement their base in Syria, as well as their passageway to sub-Saharan Africa and into the Sahel, made it a highly desirable strategic location. Whereas Russia had a clear strategy to commit itself to Libya, it did not really have a single dominant ally that it wanted to really put itself behind. It didn't have a clear goal of how to achieve that. It's not like in Ukraine where they were trying to annex Crimea and Donbass and then kind of gain subjugation. It's not like in Syria where they had Bashar al-Assad to lean on. So they basically took an event-driven tactical approach, but with a strategic focus in the long run of making Libya important. They knew Libya was important. They didn't really know how to get there. And that's where Haftar played in. Haftar was a very useful conduit for Russian influence from 2016, really on until 2020, when the Turkish military intervention began to turn the tide and the Russians began to have second thoughts. So looking ahead, Russia's influence in Libya has got several pillars and several dimensions that I think we should watch. Starting with the economic pillar. Obviously, the most predominant area is gaining access to Libya's oil reserves in the eastern part of the country. So the Wagner Group secured control over 3 of the 5 major oil ports in and around Sirte in late 2020, and that could give Russia vital access to revenues, particularly if that access can be maintained or recalibrated, and sanctions are potentially lifted on Libya at some point, and the Russians can trade with non-Western countries that haven't sanctioned them from that. So the dynamics have changed there a bit, but that's kind of what the Russians are looking for, is access to oil facilities in the eastern part of the country. The Russians are also hoping to implement nationwide infrastructure projects, particularly Russian railways, long-awaited dream of this Benghazi to Sirte railway, which was started to be constructed from 2008 to 2011 and could net the Russian government 2 billion euros in additional revenues. Again, pursuing hard currency from that. Russia is also an agricultural and wheat supplier towards Libya, and like much of the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, obviously food insecurity is an important factor now, given the disruption to sunflower oils and Russia and wheat caused by the war between Russia and Ukraine. Libya has maybe a little better position than, let's say, Sudan, which is facing half of its population with malnutrition at the moment, or even to some extent Egypt with protests, but it's still an area where Russia will contribute and look at. Also, Russia has been heavily involved in public health and using public health as a gateway to broader economic engagement. The Sputnik 5 was the first set of vaccines that arrived. Abdul Hamid Dbeibeh, who may have been on the fence with Moscow at that point, called it the first drop of rain. It was pretty praiseworthy about that. So the Russians are using that. But now, obviously, AstraZeneca, Turkey with their donations, China with their donations, other Western countries have kind of superseded that. But that was something that also they had within their broader economic umbrella. Arms contracts have largely been negotiated provisionally through the Tobruk-based government, and Haftar and Saleh and all of his minions have basically been kind of saying that they will take place once the embargo is lifted on Libya and once sanctions are lifted. But Russia has consistently voted with the international consensus on maintaining the arms embargo. The big question is, as Russia becomes increasingly an outlier in the international community and needs hard currency, will its vote change in the UNSC, and will that allow for arms to enter the country? That's an important risk to consider as well. From a security standpoint, we should be looking at several things. As I noted, the Wagner Group's security footprint could increase as a result of cuts to the formal defense budgets. That's something we should watch for. There's the presence in Libya actually increased after the government of national unity was sworn in. They recruited 300 Syrian mercenaries. And the mercenary question seems to be who blinks first. Turkey doesn't want to withdraw its troops and forces, which have a legal grounding and a legitimate presence. But Russia is kind of equating its illegitimate presence with that and doesn't want to leave. Russia does claim legitimacy, of course, through Aguila Saleh and the House of Representatives inviting them in, but even Saleh and the HOR in October 2021 said that Lavrov was making that up, and that never happened. So there's really no legal grounding for Russia's security presence, and that's different from Turkey. Important thing to keep in mind. The Russians obviously could bring in Syrians, it could bring in others from East Africa, possibly in cooperation with the UAE. The UAE funds the Wagner Group, but the Emirates have stood by Russia so far in this crisis, but with the secondary sanctions tightening on the Wagner Group and Prigozhin, that might be harder for the Emirates to do in the long term. So the question is, where does Russia get funding from this? Is it just from extractives on the ground, or will there be an external patron like they've been used to, like the Emirates? In terms of a formal security presence, what we can look for is Russia potentially establishing a base in the Mediterranean to disrupt Western migration flows and Mediterranean shipping, which could be part of a broader strategy of being a spoiler and a provocateur inside Africa, so Benghazi and Tobruk. But the question is, where will the financing come? And they're already facing a tough battle to get a base in Port Sudan, which seems to be a higher priority at the moment for the Russians.
Okay.
Diplomatically, we got the Russians supporting the elections, as long as they're basically all inclusive. They include everybody from Saif Gaddafi to the others. If Ali Bashaga were to take over, some elements of the Russian Ministry of Defense and Prigozhin in particular wouldn't be happy, as they've already smeared him in their media outlets and linked him to terrorism and extremism and whatever. But the Russians will probably deal with whoever's in charge, whether it be Debeba, whether it be Bashaga, whoever comes forward. That's something to watch. And finally, just a very brief comment on how Libya will impact Russia's strategy in West Africa. As Murat, you mentioned Mali very briefly over there. I would say that Russia has always viewed Libya and the Sahel as intertwined theaters, because it viewed all of the problems that basically happened in terms of extremism in Mali, Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso, to France's backing of the overthrow of Gaddafi. And that prism and that view is obviously there. The Russian involvement in Mali in support of the gold reserves and uranium reserves and counterterrorism will obviously be inextricably linked to whatever they do in Libya, though it could lead to the movement of personnel from Libya to there if they get more involved there in the future. Also, there's the impact of Chad, too, where the Forces of Freedom of Change, the FACT rebels, those are the Sudanese ones, FACT rebels were trained by the Wagner Group in eastern Libya. So there's a linkage between those strategies as well.
Okay, thank you, Samuel. Really, it was brief and very comprehensive. But I have one question in the third round. Not more than 2 minutes, by the way. We are running out of time. There was a clear sentiment of the Western community that desired to have Russians and Turks out of Libya, especially in terms of military capabilities, Russian Wagner and Turkish military over there. I think that now there is a clear challenge to West because of this Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, and Libya is a type of, a question mark in minds. So in this case, what could be the attitude of the Western governments towards the military presence of Turkey in Libya if compared to Russia? Because Russia will not accept leaving Libya. On the other hand, there must be somebody on the ground balancing it. So what could be the attitude? This will be the question maybe in the second round, but only for 2 minutes because we don't have time. So I want to go back to Bilgehan, and also please, Ibrahim, take everybody to the screen. Escalation and mediation. What do you expect?
In terms of, you mean domestic escalation, obviously, but in terms of mediation, that would require UN or international communities efforts first and foremost. I don't want to step into Raphaëlle's territory. I will leave it to her. But as a very important probability, we have to contemplate on Presidential Council's potential role in this, and not maybe in terms of mediation, although it has been a talking point for Presidential Council for in terms of national reconciliation. They were theoretically speaking in a very good situation to bridge the differences and have two sides to talk to each other and get rid of their differences. But in terms of escalation, we already experienced certain attempts to enter Tripoli, which would inevitably put us on the brink of an escalation and conflict within Tripoli. Fethi Bashara, through his supporters among the armed groups, he tried to enter, but he was prevented from entering. It was told to the public that it was as a result of negotiations among armed groups. But if we look at the footages of the way these supporters of Fethi Bashara, the way they were expelled, it was really tense. And when Khalifa Haftar, Aguila Saleh, who are the backers of this coalition, and Fethi Bashagha's premiership, Fethi Bashagha is under pressure from many sides. He is under pressure from his allies, like armed groups who allied with him to be the prime minister, and also from the east, and not to mention the external backers of this Bashagha and Saleh coalition. So if this patience runs out, if they put pressure, a lot on Bashagha, and if he again attempts to enter by force, that is a huge probability of escalation. And in terms of mediation, if I'm running out of my time limit, we have to seriously talk about the likelihood that Presidential Council might step in terms of finding a constitutional basis for national elections. This was firstly aired by Musa Al-Kuni, the member of the Presidential Council last year, since House of Representatives and High State Council cannot agree on a constitutional basis, and it does not seem to be happening anytime soon. So this might be a way of getting out of this conundrum, and it is not. But we have to say it is not without any severe implications either.
Okay, thank you. And Raphaëlle, what about France? I mean, this question is the toughest one because France is really important, in affecting the EU policies or shaping the Libyan ground. So what do you think about the French policy for the coming term?
Well, I mean, thanks, Murat. I mean, you're right. When mentioning France's importance with regard to EU policy, especially at the current moment where France is actually chairing the European Union. I see that. France's position, continues at least publicly to be centered about 3 points. Which is the support for the country's integrity, simultaneous legislative and presidential elections, and a push for the full implementation of the ceasefire agreement, which in essence means the removal of the withdrawal of the mercenaries from the country, especially the Russians one. That remains France's position. I think, again, as I explained, we're seeing an attempt by the US to build a coalition of willing or of like-minded countries to insulate Russia, and I think France would play a role in that coalition. We also see somehow a rapprochement in the context of Ukraine between France and Turkey. We've seen negotiations around Mariupol, and I would not be surprised if that Ukraine would also encourage rapprochement between France and Turkey on Libya as well. Now Russia appears to be like the common enemy. So that's what I would add on France's position. Perhaps if 1 minute to piggyback on what Bilgehan mentioned about dynamics on the ground. I agree that Bashar. The problem is that neither Bashar or the Beiba benefit from strong support within Tripoli or Misrata, for that matter. For different reasons. I think most of the armed groups in Tripoli and in the West are on the fence and are favoring a transactional approach, basically playing their stake and raising the stakes and edging their bets as to whom is going to offer them the most in terms of a deal. And that approach is actually detrimental to any attempt at mediating or securing a sustainable deal, because then transactional deals can change very quickly, which adds to the complexity of the situation, and that's obviously one difficulty that the UN mediation efforts are facing.
Okay, thank you so much, Raphaëlle. And Samuel, Turkish-Russian military presence, and do you expect a new approach from the Western countries, many the US or EU or individual European states?
Yeah, so obviously Russia and Turkey have established a useful relationship inside Libya based on deconfliction and based on their ability to overcome and disagreements in a compartmentalized fashion. That was something that Ibrahim Khalil even mentioned this weekend at the Doha Forum as a precursor for how the West could maybe deal with Russia and Ukraine. So that's first of all an overarching point about Russia and Turkey that I think has been an interesting element of their strategy. Obviously, Western countries, especially led by France in particular, were really keen to see Turkey and Russia both leave at the same time in terms of their mercenaries, in terms of their deployments. The problem is that the Turkish presence has been not only integrated into the Libyan military, but also Turkey's involved in the vital training of the Libyan Coast Guard in terms of providing maritime security. And if Fadi Bashaga were to become president, due to his close relationship with Turkey, they would likely be a continuation of that presence going forward. So I think that Turkey's presence in Libya is really here to stay, regardless of whether the West wants it out or the West doesn't. Erdogan has already continued, and the Turkish parliament continue to renew deployments on a yearly basis, and that seems to really be carrying forward. With regards to, obviously, some of the Syrian-aligned mercenaries from the Free Syrian Army who fought alongside Turkey, and some of the alleged allegations that are coming with regards to militias in Tripoli and Misrata and others, that informal presence is obviously a little bit murkier, and maybe there's something that Turkey can do to rein in any excesses or abuses that are being carried out by those forces. But the formal Turkish military presence and training presence is likely to remain for the foreseeable future. The Russian presence, however, is likely to remain concentrated in the east because the Wagner Group has proved itself to be an ineffective forward fighting force, and it'll probably, in a post-election environment, transition towards the guardianship of Benghazi port, the guardianship of key facilities, that stationary role where it's been more successful, or in a training role for other members of the Eastern Libyan militias in terms of snipers, in terms of air defense systems. But the problem is, if the Turks and the Russians are both training the Libyan forces in different things, maybe different things, but at the same time, you create a risk of continued frictions within the military and a problematic civil-military relations problem going forward. So that's something that needs to be watched. It's better that either both go than but both stay seems to be the worst outcome. And obviously, Russia staying is more problematic than Turkey staying because of the lack of legal grounding and because of the human rights abuses that they've been associated with, from landmine use and chemical weapons use allegedly and other things. So that's just how I basically see that situation, that Turkey's not going to go and neither is Russia. And there's a lot of problems that are associated with that.
Okay, thank you. So I see that the priority should be, preventing the escalation first. Stick to the political process as was designed by the UNSMIL. Achieve elections and also constitutional referendum as soon as possible. And, there must be no spoilers for this, either internal and external. I think this is the end state of the overall panel. So I thank you a lot participating this panel, enriched our knowledge base, and I would like to invite you for another occasion in the coming days, maybe to discuss how they achieved it. So this is a visual thinking, though. It must be for the security of the overall MENA region. So thank you, and I'm concluding this panel. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.